All right, YouTube, it's time to finally talk about the immigration quote unquote problem that we're experiencing in this country right now. What appears to be the case is that thousands and thousands of mostly children, although some adults, are pouring across the US Mexican border. Now, first, I am not anti immigration. I'm actually probably more pro immigration than most people in this country. I believe that essentially to immigrate to this country, if you're skilled, if you have education, you should be allowed in. It should be essentially a cursory check to make sure you don't have, TB or some other communicable, potentially deadly disease, and a check of your background to make sure you're not, a murderer or something like that. And then I think immigration should be swift and easy. I think we expend a huge amount of money on vetting people for immigration. We have way too many immigration agents. We don't need all of these things. I think it should be far easier to move into this country for anyone who isn't, a criminal or infected with some horrible disease or a communist. I think we should continue to keep communists out of the country just because communists are scumbags, and they are obviously insane because they, support ideas that don't work, and demonstrably so. I don't think that most of the Latin American people that are moving into this country like commies any more than I do, by the way. But here's the thing. Obama, as the executive, I agree with Obama on some of his views on immigration, by the way. I don't believe we should be deporting illegals just because, they happen to be illegally here. I think if they're not committing any crime and they're paying their taxes and so forth, I don't really have a problem with them. I know that a lot of people do, and they're worried about white minority and Mexicans will take over and Mexican supremacists are going to become separatists. I don't believe all of that stuff because most of this same rhetoric was used regarding the Irish in the 1800s, the Chinese later than that, the Japanese, the Vietnamese. They said the same thing about Scandinavian immigrants back in the late 1800s. People keep worrying about these groups not being capable of meshing with the culture, and it has never actually been the case. Now you look at the Irish people, and at the time people were saying, they're Catholics, they're not Protestants, it's horrible, they're Catholic people. They're Iberians, they're not actually even white, they're actually Africans that just magically grew white skin. People used to say these things, well, they're always drunk and they fight and their crime is going to go up. And now you look at areas where the Irish settled, and they're actually some of the best parts of the country. You look at Boston, it's one of the least unstable large cities in the country. I don't fall prey to all of this sort of populist rhetoric. I do have a problem with allowing immigrants to this country if they're disease-ridden, which some are, and we don't seem to be enforcing any sort of medical containment of these individuals, which I think is absolutely ridiculous and is eventually going to lead to outbreaks of disease in this country. It has nothing to do with race, by the way. It wouldn't matter where they're from. Someone could be from Great Britain, come across the Canadian border and have AIDS, or have TB potentially because they took a trip to Africa 5 years ago, and they'd be just as dangerous as somebody that got it in the Amazon or in the middle of Honduras. So it has nothing to do with race or ethnicity or any of that stuff. Medical screenings should be put in place for all immigrants. And I would say that should apply as well. People who move from the United States to some other country, of course they should go through medical screening. Of course they should. Every country should be intrinsically concerned about the spread of possible pandemic-level diseases. It's common sense. It doesn't matter where they're from or where they're going. It's not a racial issue whatsoever. Criminal background checks. I understand that the laws in the United States and the laws in like Mexico or Honduras might be different, and that what we qualify as a potentially dangerous infringement might not be considered, or they might consider something a crime that we don't, and I think there should be some discretion involved, but a check should be made nonetheless to make sure we're not letting in axe murderers into the country. Again, regardless of where they happen to be from. There are a lot of illegal immigrants in this country, by the way, that are from Eastern Europe, that are white individuals, objectively so, that even, racist individuals would identify them as white. Well, guess what? They're here illegally. They're illegal immigrants. And I don't see people having a big problem with it, which shows me that a lot of these people are simply racist, although Mexican and Latin American aren't races, against these people from Central and South America and Mexico. I don't have a problem with allowing children to be reunited with their families in this country. However, although I agree with some of Obama's pro-immigrant rhetoric, and although I believe that our immigration system is almost intentionally obtuse, it's overbearing, it's too complicated a process, it's too restrictive in many ways, although I believe that, his job is to enforce existing immigration law, not to ignore parts of the law, not to tell the border guards to stand down and do nothing, not to tolerate, apparently there are now people in Mexico firing shots across the border to harass our border agents. That is not his job. His job is to enforce existing law. So although I believe that it needs to be reformed, and I would consider this one of the gravest issues that do need reform for the continuance of our country as a nation which was built by immigrants anyway, although I believe that, although I agree in spirit with some of his ideas on that, that's not his choice to unilaterally begin ignoring our laws. And I think the risk to this country of allowing the president to ignore existing law and interpret it and choose to enforce it any way he desires is far graver a threat to the fabric of our country than ignoring the immigration problem until he's gone. I think giving him that level of power is unacceptable. It is unconstitutional that he would do so. His job is to enforce, not to make law, not to interpret law, not to determine, as he's tried to do, whether a law is actually lawful or not. His job is simply to execute the laws that are in place. And he's not doing that. And now we're finding out that these border agents are not letting the media into this one crossing. By the way, I've been to McAllen. I've been in the very region of Texas before where these people are coming across. I've seen the border wall. These people are not crossing the border without the border guards knowing it. They had to have been given a stand-down order in order for these people to be crossing in these large numbers. That's the only possible scenario that would work. This particular crossing, it is fenced, it is guarded. These guards were told by the president, most likely, or by one of his staff, to stand down and do nothing. It's ridiculous. Because these individuals are and also, by the way, this is a humanitarian crisis, and on this, I feel sorry for these people. Because they're coming to this country looking for something better for themselves. They're looking for jobs, they're looking for their family, they're looking for medical treatment, they're looking for opportunities that their home country, Mexico and Honduras being chief among them, do not afford them. And what does the government do but throw them in FEMA camps along the border and then fly them out to other random camps? They're being held like prisoners in FEMA camps, almost as though it was a dry run for putting American citizens in. And people refuse to see the writing on the wall. We've already done this sort of thing before. We interned hundreds of thousands of German and Japanese Americans during World War II, and nobody said a word because it was under the banner of keeping the country safe. It was unlawful. The government apologized later. Oh, sorry that we broke the Constitution. Sorry that we violated your civil rights just because you happen to be of Japanese or German descent. But it's okay because we kept the country safe. And we were worried that there were tens or hundreds of thousands of spies magically appearing all over the country. The government's done this before, and there will come a time in the future when it will apologize to these people that are currently being held in substandard, crowded conditions in these camps. It would not be difficult to simply green card these people, allow them into these are children, they're not felons. They're not terrorists. Some of these children are 5 or 6 years old. They're not running around strapped to bombs. They're not, running around shooting people. They're not doing anything wrong except they came north of the border without, being with their family already and their family holding residency or a green card or something. I don't begrudge them the right to come to this country. I don't have a problem with these immigrants. I think that in many ways we don't have enough immigration to this country. I will differ from, and I would say some of that would come from Western Europe and other parts that Americans have no problem with immigration coming from for some reason. But between the president unilaterally ignoring our immigration laws as they currently stand, and the substandard conditions these people are being held in, and the fact that apparently there's little to no medical screening going on, and the fact that apparently the government was advertising escort services to actually bring these children north of the border, makes me question why this is happening, especially why it's happening now, under an administration that was foiled at attempts to reform the immigration process. I think Obama just got bored and decided to act unilaterally, which is unconstitutional. It's unlawful. Regardless of whether I agree with his views on immigration, I don't agree that the president has the right to ignore the existing laws. Now, there are special laws governing children because they're underage. You can't shoot them as they come across the border. They're little kids. Not only would it be an international incident, it'd be unethical to do that. It'd be immoral. However, you can screen them for medical conditions. You can do that. You can look up who is already in the country, whether they're legal or illegal immigrant, and find out if they're committing crimes. We have the capability to do that. You can at least shore up the border and stop these people that are apparently firing across the border. At least let the agents fire back if they're being shot at from the other side of the border. What, are we worried that the Mexicans are going to declare war on the United States? Are we honestly worried that that would, happen, that they're suddenly going to start firing artillery across the border into the United States? Do we think that they're stupid enough to have that much of a death wish that they want to get, nuked off the face of the earth because they would pull such a stunt? Of course not. They're not going to do jack shit about it because they're far weaker than the United States. They don't have the capability to so much as put one soldier across the border without their entire nation being glassed. Let the border agents fire back if someone across the border is firing upon them. The Mexican government obviously isn't capable or willing to deal with this issue, so we should fire back. And let the kids across the border, but screen them. Screen them and those relatives that they say are here for criminal backgrounds and for medical conditions. If it's a treatable medical condition, get them treatment. If not, then what do you do? I don't know. It's a complicated issue. We share a very long border with a very poor country, which has porous borders to its south as well, allowing Hondurans and Guatemalans and so forth to march through the country into the United States. And while I don't have a problem with even mass immigration, because we've had it before and it actually made the economy grow quite quickly under the Homestead Act, which people magically have forgotten all about its existence. Up until the fucking 1970s it existed, and then as soon as it stopped, suddenly the economy started sliding backwards. I wonder why. Although I don't have a problem with them, the president doesn't get to unilaterally decide whether to enforce existing immigration laws. He's tasked with the defense of this nation. Part of that is defending the borders. Part of that is defending the borders against large numbers of people that are crossing it illegally. So yes, allow amnesty, if that's what it takes. Allow these children to be given back to their families that are already in this country, illegally or legally. I don't care. But check them for medical... The bare minimum for the defense of the border would require that at the very least, you are screening them for medical conditions and criminal backgrounds. Everything else is superfluous. That is defense of the border. And the government is not doing that. Instead, it's just cramming them into camps where disease could spread anyway. If any of these people are diseased, all of these immigrants now, potentially, have been infected with TB or some other disorder, some other syndrome or disease or parasite or whatever. And they're living in crammed-in conditions like sardines for long periods of time, which at the very least is similar to the sort of humanitarian crises that you see in other parts of the world. We're used to seeing this sort of thing in Africa or the Middle East or parts of southern Latin America. We're not used to seeing this in the United States. I think the government doesn't honestly know how to handle it, and there are inquiries going on right now into this situation, but the problem is the left is like, let them all in and don't even check them, and Obama can do no wrong because he happens to have black skin. And the right is like, we shouldn't let anyone in, build a huge wall, there should be zero immigration at all times, Sieg Heil. Both sides, they're lunatics. They don't know what the hell's going on. They don't understand the dynamics of this world at all. They think that a fence is going to stop people, or they think that it's sensible to let people in who are going to infect large proportions of the people they're being stored with in these sort of FEMA camps, who potentially have diseases and are spreading them to other immigrants. Neither side seems to understand the basic tenets of common sense. In no other country on earth do we see this problem. Yes, there are problems with immigration into Europe. Guess what? In order for people to immigrate to Europe, usually they're crossing either the Mediterranean in a ship, as the North Africans do into Italy and Spain, or they're flying in legally because the government simply green card anyone who wants to come in as long as they're Islamic, which is why now people apparently can't get, non-halal meats at Subways in Great Britain or Sweden, where, people shove a dildo up their ass every day to check their privilege. I'm not for that kind of immigration, but guess what? We don't have the problem of Islamists moving into this country. We have the problem of people simply not being screened properly and potentially infecting people in this country with diseases that are more endemic to the third world, that exist in this country, yes, but at controlled rates. In this country, we generally don't have a great deal of a problem with TB. We generally don't have a lot of meningitis outbreaks in the United States. We generally have a lid on most of these communicable disorders. We're going to lose that grip on these diseases if we continue to allow people in here unchecked. Give them a medical exam, do a criminal background check. If they're not a criminal and they're not infected with TB or something, let them in the damn country. I don't care how much the populists bitch and moan. I do not have a problem with Latin Americans, with Hispanics, or whatever else you want to term these people. I don't have a problem with anyone that wants to move into this country. But most of them are escaping tyrannical regimes, and maybe if they were raised under a tyrannical regime and they move into this country, they'll adopt libertarianism because they know what it's like to live in a country where you're not allowed to defend yourself. You're not allowed to speak freely. The press is completely muzzled. Theocracy reigns, or there's a complete oligarchy, and it's not like in the United States where corporations control the elections. It's an out-and-out oligarchy where it's clear to everyone who's in charge. So I don't have a problem. I say let them all in as long as they're willing to fight for freedom and they don't accept statism and they actually still believe in the American dream. I'd say let them in, but please at least give them a medical background check. We don't need an epidemic coming to this country because Obama is unwilling to enforce existing immigration law. It doesn't make sense to me. That's my word on this particular issue. That's about all. Peace out.